All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm excited to have you, and I've got with me as well Bridget. I'll introduce us in just a second. But first, just a shout out to Teknion Data Solutions for hosting these webinars. Teknion is a gold partner of Tableau. And so we're excited to use Tableau to help our clients, as well as just share with the community how we're using Tableau and some of the really cool things that we're able to do with it. But additionally, Teknion has other partnerships that you can see here. Warescape, which is a data warehouse automation tool, Alteryx, predictive analytics, data blending, data modeling, all kinds of fun things you can do with Alteryx. Snowflake, data warehousing and databases in the cloud, and state-of-the-art performance there. And Data Robot, our newest partnership, which automates some of the artificial intelligence and that side of things when it comes to working with data. So we love helping our clients with data, all kinds of things across the spectrum that we love to do. And we do also have webinars around some of those other topics as well. So if you're interested in those, reach out, and we'd love to keep you informed about that. Today, Bridget and I will be sharing with you. We're excited to do that. Here is a little bit of information about us, as well as some beautiful pictures that are kind of interesting to see. But feel free to reach out to either one of us at any time. We'd love to connect with you and talk about anything you want. A little bit of housekeeping, so keeping it brief, but a couple of things. So we will have a Q&A. You should have a panel where you can enter in questions as we go. We'll probably wait until the end to really answer most of them. But feel free to type them in as we go, and we'll reserve some time at the end for that. Also, the recording will be available. I think we finally have maybe reached a little bit of stability on letting you know when those recordings are available. So you should receive an email as soon as the video is posted. But in the meantime, you can go to that address, look at previous videos of webinar recordings, as well as maybe a few other things that are hidden in there, which could be kind of fun to look at as well. So today, Chopped Viz. What Bridget and I are going to do is we're going to take some dashboards that are already constructed, so we're not going to build something in front of you. Instead, we're going to deconstruct it. We're going to pull it apart, rip it apart, chop it up, and dissect it before your eyes, so that as we do that, we'll uncover some of the hidden secrets and techniques and design that went into creating these dashboards. So it ought to be a lot of fun. It's a great way to learn and see things that other people have done that could be really interesting to think about and might spark a few ideas along the way. So, Bridget, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off, and I'm excited to see what dashboards you're going to pull apart.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joshua. I also want to give a quick shout out to the audience because this was a session that was submitted by our viewers, and so this is actually in response to feedback. And so as you watch these and have ideas about other things you'd like to see, please feel free to submit to us. We definitely want to make sure that we keep things very, very interesting. So thank you very much. The first thing I'm going to show is a dashboard I did for another webinar. So this may or may not look very familiar, but part of what I want to focus on is two pieces of this, is design and actions. So one of the probably most interesting features that Tableau has to me is this really nifty feature called actions. And so I can access these by going to Dashboard, Actions, and I can see kind of in this dashboard, I've got two different ones. I did choose to name them in a certain way. And you can see I've got two different ones, one to run on select, one to run on a hover. And then so, for example, I can add these or I can edit these. So if I edit the one on select, you can see I've got two different sheets controlling a number of these. And then you can also see that I've named them. One of the things I do when I do a lot of dashboards is I try to name my sheets so that they have some kind of logical grouping or order. So you can see I've got this one, it says 1.2 Pareto-ish versus 1.1 map. And then lastly, I've got state name, which is kind of buried in there on the bottom. So the whole thing is that this piece looks like one seamless piece. So this is actually 3 different dashboards with 2 different graphics, and then some free floating text. The other thing that you'll notice is that we had that hover action in there, and I did disable a tooltip just so that I could show this without this being excessively obnoxious, is that just by using hover, we can kind of emulate some of the features we've seen in other tools like D3. I personally am a big fan of those very interactive dashboards where you can kind of hover on things and different things move. I find that it kind of surprises and delights your audience when you can kind of just put your finger on something and kind of see something else respond to it. I also feel like it encourages people who are less likely to click to actually do this big scary number, which is to click on things. I do find that a lot of users tend to be terrified of clicking on things. And so I find sometimes that using hover actually encourages people to kind of get a little bit more playful than they normally would be, and to actually click on buttons and start seeing, well, okay, I've seen it moves. Now if I click on it, what does it do? So that is one way that I use actions, and I was also kind of pointed out that I use hover quite a bit in a lot of my work, and didn't realize that until somebody pointed that out to me. Another thing trying to do is using visual communication. So you can see here I've got the text that says faster, I've got a little rabbit, and slower. So the data itself, if you look at it, is not necessarily intuitive because it's variation from average. So how do I make this more intuitive to my end users? And so I chose to use graphics that were very, very understated. So they're not prominent, but they're there. And so you can see that anything kind of lower and in the negative, that's faster. And then anything kind of higher is slower. So understanding, kind of giving people that frame of reference. I've just used a very basic text box here with color in it to create containers. And so this just creates almost like a UI for end users. Same thing here with this title bar. And the nice part is nowadays you can use padding. Way back in the dark ages when I did this, I hit spacebar a lot. So that is a feature that I could actually go back through and update to where the padding is a little bit more normalized and I wouldn't have to space things out or separate things in the way that I have. So that's kind of this dashboard. One of the other kind of little tricks that I do a lot, you'll notice that this shape is fairly pleasing to the eye. And part of that is because there is this really cool thing called Fibonacci. And Fibonacci is just a mathematical way of kind of engineering the eye to see things in a nice pattern. This is not a true Fibonacci, but it is kind of something that you'll notice if you look at a lot of my public work. It will kind of pop up over and over again. So you'll kind of see where it's not a true Fibonacci in any way, but there is certain things to do with spacing where it is kind of subtly alluded to, and that does seem to be enough. One of the other kind of design secrets about color is keeping it very, very understated. And so with this, one thing to notice, sales, everything sales is in a blue. Everything profit related is kind of more in a green tone. And then finally, this gray being amount is odd. And so one of the things I did with this was I just made it gray so that all 3 of these pieces play well together from a color standpoint, but are clear enough and kind of tie together enough that you get an understanding of what you're looking at without realizing what you're looking at. This dashboard in particular, surprisingly, you'll hear a lot of times that you should perhaps, you should only have so many sheets in a dashboard and things like that. There are actually 9 sheets on this dashboard. So if you're following best practices, and they always say, you should only have 3 or 4 of these sheets stuffed on here, well, this one's got 9. So you've got 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and then these cute little KPIs are also individual sheets. So keep in mind, sometimes you'll hear the rules, but it's okay to break them as well. So that's kind of that kind of quick chopped view. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into actions. And one of the things is, and a new feature is being released soon, which is kind of these action buttons. But, for people who have not upgraded and for, those of us, older clients, I've got this kind of next filtering action here, and I made a phone app. And so what this does is this uses actions to progress through kind of this mini application. Now there is a mistake in this, and we will see this. I'm not going to call it out right away, but I do want to kind of take a look at these actions again. So you can see most of these are set to run on select. I've kind of got called out what they're going to run on. You'll also notice that they're only running on certain fields. And that just helps keep it a little bit lean. So as I progress through this, and I'm kind of building this application and looking at animals. And so this is a zoo tracker, and I can say, okay, I've seen the American bison today, and I'll log the sighting, and then I'll go back to animals. But what do I notice with the action is that this isn't really feeling like a true application because my American bison is still highlighted. And so oftentimes when we do certain actions, sometimes they don't behave the way we expect. And so this is kind of where it's broken, in that the filter doesn't reset in the manner that I expect it to. And so the reason is that there's nothing to tell it to clear. And so to give a better example of one that works, and I intentionally leave that one broke so that people can see, okay, great, that one doesn't work, is I've got this other one where, again, I've got just different actions, again, passing as an application to move me back and forth. And so I'll kind of just click through these. I'm a little less worried at this point about the dashboard itself. I'm more interested in how the actions behave. So here you can see I don't run into that. Every time I click somewhere, nothing is highlighted, nothing is forced out and inactive. So what's the difference? And so if I go into my actions, I can see I've got filter. So this all looks the same. So let's go look at these filters and figure out why these are behaving differently. So for one, I've got an entirely separate navigational system to allow me to move back and forth. So if I look at my zoo app and look at that, I've got one source with no navigation source. So I do have two sources. This is doing a write back. But I don't have certain things. The other thing that you'll notice is if I go back in here, I've got this action filter set to 1. So what is going on with this? And so if I look at this filter and edit this, what I've done is I've just created a field called 1. And so that way, every time I click, it refreshes and clears. That's all I'm doing with that. And so when I look at my dashboard again and go to my dashboard actions, I can see that I'm including selected fields, one being the filter. And what that does is every time it refreshes that filter to just clear out what was there. So I don't get into the filter trap of being over filtered. Whereas on my zoo one, I don't have anything clearing that filter. So all the filters continue to cascade. So that's kind of that trick there. So some final pieces, Tableau is releasing extensions, but one of the things I did here is I did do write back. And so you've got where this HTML is set up, and if I look at the actions that drive that, I can see somewhere, give me one moment, it'll be over here, where I've got a new type of action that we've not seen thus far. So far I've shown filtering actions and I've shown highlighting actions, but this is a third type of action. If I edit this type of action, I can see that this is a URL action. And so what I'm doing is I'm passing fields and submitting it through Google. So I'm literally creating this URL. And so if I test the link, it will pop up in one of my browser windows, a test link, which may or may not work if it grabbed correct data points. So that's a trick that I also use. The URL action filtering is also very handy if you are doing data like QA or you want to send your users to a portal. In the past, I've done quality assurance, and logged it so that people could actually kind of pop out to, say, Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce and edit entries. So that's where this kind of URL action can be very handy in the workplace. And so the last thing to kind of look at and kind of change or view is a viz I did recently on the human brain. And so if we look at this is actually polygons in Tableau. So I used a program, so I started with an SVG editor and made these shapes so that I could have Tableau draw a brain. Big reason for this is I want to build a visual hierarchy so that I can start layering the brain and looking at it that way and begin to understand how the brain relates to both the primary lobes and lobules. So, Joshua?
All right, Bridget, thank you. You know, before I jump into my side of things, we do have a question about the write back functionality of your Zoo app.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so maybe go back and show a little bit more of how that's working.
So how that's working is I actually went through Google and made a form. And so this form wants to know a unique key. So the unique key is just something it generates. So then I have a primary ID, and then it automatically says that this is one visit. And then I'm using in the dashboard itself, I did supply a name field. So that way, if different users use this, it'll track this name. And then with the region, that goes off of the URL, the exhibit number goes off the URL, and then the ID of the animal gets passed through as well as the animal diet. And what that does is it allows me to then do this other piece, which is kind of gamification within Tableau. So this particular dashboard has two data sources. One is the primary data source used to create the bulk of the visualization. But then from there, it actually will refresh and update every day so I can begin to start analyzing my visits. And that's all from this secondary source, which is the Google form. So I'm supplying some of the data to it and replicating some of the data, in part because I couldn't join the data through Tableau Public and have it refresh. If I were on a private server, it would probably work to where I could have one data source. Due to limits within Tableau Public, it's a server I don't own. And so I'm limited to a daily refresh. That's why I did it this way. So it's a mock of write back using URLs. And so that URL just goes to this form. And then there's this cute little trick that I did through Google, which basically every time I submit the form through URL, it automatically submits. And then I've got access to the sheet, and that's what's actually being pulled in. So if I go here, I can get kind of a rough idea of what that data looks like. So you can see where I've got some of the data I initially supplied manually, and then where I've supplied the rest of the data so that I get kind of a count, and then also kind of can track where I am with my goals and so forth.
Very cool. So yeah, that's a really cool trick with actions to be able to use a URL to potentially write data to a source. One other quick question: the Fibonacci spiral that you brought up a couple of times. What is that? It's not built into Tableau, so how are you getting it to show up?
So the Fibonacci is an image. Also kind of quickly call this out with actions. This is another where I've used URLs to actually go to sites. So that functionality I mentioned before, oops. This is what happens when you get click happy. But so this really probably closely emulates the QA process that I did before. So you can kind of click on this link and it will take you to a site I don't own and actually look up that report card. So you can kick your users off to other sites. And so that's where that URL sends you to that filtered view. I didn't have to go and look for Ottawa. I went right from Ottawa here. So that's kind of where that URL is handy. With the Fibonacci, that is something known primarily in architecture, but also used a lot in art. It's just a mathematical calculation. It's a flow that our eyes like. And so I've got a PNG of this particular thing, and so all I've done is just overlay it. And then again, I have in the past also laid this down in the background and designed and made little artifacts around it, in part for interest, in part as a challenge to myself. So this is kind of one of those cheater ways. If you need to make something that's visually pleasing, this is a great way to do it. I have a subscription to Noun Project, so I downloaded the PNG from there. And then you can just lay it on as an image. So if I double click, you can see I've got two different ones. So I can actually change it around and design around that.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bridget. We'll come back to additional questions as we go, and probably towards the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to switch to presenting.
Okay.
All right. Well, one thing that I love about Tableau is Tableau Public, because there are so many different dashboards and visualizations and data stories that get shared there, that if you see something that catches your eye, most of the time, as long as the author has allowed it, you can download the workbook and you can deconstruct what they've done, and it can be a really good learning experience. I'll admit I don't do it as often as I should, but when I do, I typically do learn some things. And so Tableau Public is run by Tableau, and they have on their staff multiple individuals such as Ben Jones and a few others that we'll see through here. Now these are not their creations, but these are creations of other Tableau Public authors that they selected as notable vises of 2017. So they show them and tell why they selected them. Tableau is very good about calling out work that is good or notable in some way. So this is selections over the whole year. You might also think of looking at Viz of the Day or Viz of the Week. Those can be some very interesting things to look at as well. So I'd like to just sort of pull this up and maybe go through them one by one, or maybe just sort of scroll down and see if anything catches my eye. And it's nice to see these thumbnails of the dashboards. I see some interesting things here, like some use of icons. That could be interesting to see how that was done. Some donut charts. So there might be something that catches your eye that you think, oh, I wonder how they did that. Here's some good use of color and images. So there might be some things that you see that you think, oh, I want to see how they did that. Here's an interesting small multiples area chart kind of thing. So I might be curious, did they do that in one viz, or is that multiple vises? How did they build that? But as I scroll down, there are definitely ones that I see that I think, oh, I don't have any clue how do you create kind of this sand key kind of view? What did they have to do to the data potentially to build that? And that might be interesting. But one of these really caught my eye, which is this one, selected by Andy Cogley, but created by Mike Cisneros. And so I really was interested in seeing how was this one created, because it is just visually compelling. And as Andy notes, it tells a great story as well. He mentions you could print this and show it in an exhibition. I agree. So I might click on it, open it up in Tableau Public, take a look at it here. Tableau Public seems to be acting up a little bit. I noticed that earlier as well. But the nice thing is that I can come here and actually download the workbook itself and then pull it open so that I can start to see how that was designed. So here it is in Tableau Desktop. And especially if I'm looking at someone else's dashboard for the first time and I want to understand what they're doing, I'm going to look just overall at the dashboard itself. I'm going to look for clues that they've given, maybe help or instructions. So here is an explanation of the chart, which is very useful. So Mike describes how the length of the bars is not the value, the absolute value of gold or oil. Rather, the length of the bars is the percentage of the maximum value. So the overall maximum is here, $140 a barrel. So that bar gets to be 100%. All the other bars are how close to that maximum value was the price of oil. Same thing for gold. So he calls out the maximum on the oil. He calls out some other interesting things on gold, but I could find the max of gold as well, and realize that all of the other bars are that. So that was helpful to understand the chart itself. Another key thing, I think, when looking at other people's work is to actually find out who they are. So I recognize Mike from Twitter and from Tableau Public, but definitely somebody to look at and follow. He's got some incredible work. You can see his board here of just samples of things he's done. The oil and gold shows up there, but also some other just incredible things. So lots of really cool stuff here. Definitely somebody to keep up with, and you might be interested to read more about him and find out more about him. But he did give me permission to tear apart his dashboard. He noted that this is an older work, so he's probably done some really incredible stuff since. But I love this one. Just the overall color, design, the use of images, and so I'm curious to get started pulling it apart and just seeing how is it designed. One thing that's really nice to do right off is just to take a look at see what sheets are used. So the nice thing about this dashboard, one of the reasons I love it, is that it is not incredibly complex. It's beautiful, but the beauty is in simplicity. So there's one main visualization, which I'll take a look at in a moment, and then a couple of other supporting ones. I've got a sheet 2 and 3, which serve as labels, but they're dynamic, so it's pulling from the data. And then this reading the chart, which I use to help me understand the dashboard, that turns out to be a viz as well, so I might take a look at that. And then I'm going to take a look at some other things just to understand, okay, he's got some labels, and that's interesting to see, so I could potentially even remove a label just to see how it's constructed. He's got some images that help tie the dashboard together. There's not a lot of images, and they're not incredibly complex, but they just sort of float there. And if I remove them, you can see those images, which apparently that's what was not showing up on Tableau Public, but they should be there. And it just the use of images just really reinforces the concepts of oil and gold, ties together the colors, and just works really nicely. So they're not wasted at all. They have an effect. And another nice thing about using images for text is I don't have to worry about how that font would render in a different browser or on a different machine. That image will show up the same everywhere, which is also kind of nice. He's got some footer information. I definitely probably want to check out the data source, especially if I'm really interested in understanding where this data came from, how reliable it is. But for now, what I'm really interested in is, how did he put this together? What does the data look like, and what other techniques did he use that might be interesting to use in my dashboard? So I like this idea of a question mark box that gives me a hover tooltip, and so I'm curious how he developed that. So what I'll do is I'll just go to that sheet and take a look. It looks actually like a fairly simple thing that he's put together. He's got a question mark, which turns out is just a calculated field, which is literally a question mark. So that's going on the text. He's got it set as a circle. He's set the colors, the shading on the dashboard itself to give it this nice color layout, and then he's just got some number of records on there just to pull in some other things from the data. And then the tooltip itself is just a hard-coded tooltip, so just typed out, or maybe he typed it out somewhere else and pasted it in here. But this is a nice technique because I have some really nice rich text editing, so that I can set up different fonts, different colors of the text, different styles. So done really well here, but it gives a lot of possibility for what that tooltip might look like. And then when it's sized correctly on the dashboard, this is how it looks. So that's a technique that I might borrow, might use in some of my dashboards as well. And then as I look through it, I've got some sheet 2, sheet 3 action going on. I might come back to those, but I really just want to focus on this one, the main one, which he's called oil versus gold. So I'm going to go to the sheet because this is where I'm really going to start to understand the data and understand how it's been put together. And so being able to see the fields and how they were placed on different shelves, this is very useful. Being able to see that certain things are annotations, that helps me understand what he's doing. It also helps me understand the story a little bit of how he's tracking the price of gold relative to the price of oil, and the story that it tells of the lead up to 2008 and the financial crisis. So gold just kept increasing, or oil, sorry, and gold as well. But interestingly, right around the time of the crash, right after the crash, the price of oil just dropped precariously, but the price of gold, people turn to gold, and he calls that out in his story. So great story, but now I'm curious, how did he build this view? What's going on here? There are several things that I suspect. So I noticed that he's got sort of a gray shading here and a gold shading here. I can tell the colors of the bars themselves are set by what he's got on the color shelf. So that's just measure names. But the shading itself, where is that coming from? I suspect that he's got some reference bands. So I'm going to try to find those. I'm going to turn on some headers that he has hidden. So we'll show some headers on these things, and I'll take a look to see if there are any reference lines or bands. Not on that one, but down here there is a reference line, and if I edit that, what I find is that absolutely he set the line at 0, which runs right down the center, and filled one side gold, filled the other side gray, which gives him this nice color scheme. So that's a nice technique that I might think of how I could use banding within my charts. I also really like how he's created a vertical timeline. That's something you don't often see, but used very well here. So I notice he's using the month of date, a month value here, and that works really well. And then I'm curious as to why he's got a couple of different fields here as a dual axis. And it turns out that if I remove one, I can start to see, okay, that was the white line there in the middle, that calculation 1. So what is that? Well, what he's doing is he is showing the indexed prices of one or the other. So he's showing the relationship as one might become more valuable or less valuable, and so it swings that white line. But that leads me down to understanding some other calculations. He's got an indexed gold price and an indexed oil price. I can see them over here, but I might even want to take a look at them in the editor. And so this is what he's doing. He's using a fixed level of detail to find the minimum and maximum prices within the data set. So we're looking at the oil prices here, and he's creating an index to show that percentage value for the bars. And the negative is interesting. Well, that's because for oil, he wants that to show up to the left. But if I look at gold, nope, that's just the gold price, but the indexed gold price. So the gold calculation is the same, except no negative, because Mike wanted to show that as a positive value. So now I've got a little bit of understanding about the data and how that works. I might need to dig into it a little bit more to really understand the data set and understand how things are working. Oh, and look at that. As I deconstruct, I may break some things or change some things. I'll turn that header back off. But notice how that also allowed him to tie those images in. So I've got this oil well, and it kind of looks like the oil is underground, and it's pumping it up. So that's just really cool. Just overall, an incredible design, an incredible story that he's telling. Nothing incredibly complex. A fixed level of detail calculation, but no incredibly complex actions or anything else, but just an incredible story and design that's very compelling. So I've learned a few things just looking at this dashboard, some things that I may take and use elsewhere, and just think about how could I creatively use images? How can I provide unobtrusive help to my audience? How can I call out things within a story? How can I use colors effectively? So I love this dashboard. I love tearing it apart and seeing what's going on. I'm going to pull up one other dashboard, in some ways similar, in some ways not. This is actually a dashboard that I created. So, oh, and I seem to have lost it. Here it is. So this one was much more of a longer dashboard, but somewhat similar because it is also a vertical timeline. It is the changing shape of history, and so as I entered into the Iron Viz feeder competition last year, this was my entry. The topic was geospatial, so coming up with a concept of using geospatial data and the new ability of Tableau. At that time, it was new, but now seems like an integral part. The ability for it to map custom shapes. So I built this timeline, and as you scroll down, you go further and further into history with some interactivity along the way. So I can change the years within certain time frames and see. Oh, it's got to refresh the whole thing now. I'll just pull it up over here, and I can change the years. And as I do that, I'll see the changing shape of counties, and here we see the colonies as they grow over time. I can see who the leader of the government was at the time, and I'll see the flags change over time. So some interactivity along the way, but most of it is just scrolling down and seeing that as it goes, and then telling some little data stories along the way. So here's the population growth in the 1600s. of the colonies. And then we move into the 1700s. We can see that the British flag changed. Still no red stripes there for Ireland yet, but by the 1700s it's close to what we're used to. And then I can scroll through and see which king or queen was on the throne over the colonies, all the way up to 1775, King George III. And I can see the population growth. In fact, as I deconstruct this, what we may find out is that this vertical timeline is actually one viz that actually is a timeline of population, and I can kind of get that here on the side. I can see the population per year, so that's kind of an interesting thing. And then I see some other details, some other small data stories here of the French and Indian War, which I'll admit I don't know a whole lot about, but I can see that the British and the French were the two main combatants. They were allied with various Native American tribes, and I can see that both suffered about the same number of casualties, but the British had a lot more forces in action, and ultimately that they won that war. So that's kind of interesting. And then we go on. I had not realized that at one time the United States had territories all the way up into what's now Canada. Beautiful country up there, so it'd be kind of nice if it was still American. At least that's my perspective. If you're Canadian, you're probably glad that that's not true. But kind of interesting that at one time that was the case. But as we scroll through history, there's the more recognizable shape of the United States. Here's the country divided in the Civil War. The deadliest war of American history. You can see how casualties there compare to other deadly wars for the United States: World War II, World War I, Vietnam, and the Korean War. And then here is the final outcome of this that looks much more like what we're used to the United States looking like now, with all of the states that we're used to. Most of the counties look like they do now, although interestingly those counties do change even year to year, and so that's kind of interesting. So how was this built? If I were to deconstruct this, what would I point out along the way? Well, one thing that I would point out is that there are a lot of images used in this dashboard, and you can see that these images are semi-transparent, and that's used to kind of create this this old paper, old manuscript look, and if I remove those images, you'll start to see, okay, yeah, that is just one sort of yellowish peach kind of color. Depending on your monitor, the color might shift a little bit, but you can see that's what's going on. But they had to be strategically placed, because if the image was over top of something that that I wanted to be interactive, now I can't click on those sorts of things. So having those images strategically placed was important to avoid anything where I wanted hovering or clicking. But if there was something that I didn't care or even wanted to intentionally obscure, so for example, this chart, it'll change underneath the transparent image, but I don't care that you can't click it or you can't get tooltip. That's just fine. It serves its purpose. And in fact, it's kind of nice that you can't click it so that it's got this kind of a view. By the way, Tableau has announced transparent vizzes, so that will be fun, because now you can start to put these kind of images behind the viz instead of on top, and that'll open up all kinds of possibilities as well. I start to deconstruct this, and I realize that's the first thing. Also along the way, there are some other vizzes that maybe here so I can remove that. I also have used this kind of information box kind of technique that we saw on Mike's dashboard. So same kind of principle there. Here describing the data and the images where they came from. So as I deconstruct it, I might even just start to get rid of some of these things. There are text elements around here, and then some of these are visualizations. So this is a label with, and it is just the label itself with the population. But if I go to the viz, I can see it's using a data source. And here's another thing that as I start to think about deconstructing a dashboard, I'm going to want to understand the different data sources in use. So here, quite a few different data sources. There's one for population, one for the flags, one just for the French and Indian War. There's one that has all of the counties, so that would be the main one. But I'll want to understand those data sources. I have rulers and presidents, a couple of different copies there, and that would be important to start to understand why are there a couple of different copies. But if I remove that worksheet, then I'll notice that that the flag here is just an image, but some of these other flags are actual visualizations because they can change over time. So as we changed the date filter, the slider control, I might occasionally see that flag change from time to time. So 1700 versus 1775, a different British flag. Same thing with the rulers and the presidents. If I look here, I've got it set up to where each individual ID within the data source is a different shape, and those are using custom shapes for an image of the president or king or queen who might have been ruling at the time. And again, all of these are controlled just by these various parameter controls, which is controlling the filter for the counties, the filter for the flags, as well as the rulers. I could look potentially at other things as well, but may not due to time. But that's how I would go through as I would start to deconstruct a visualization and start to think through how a dashboard has been built, or if I wanted to show how I've built a dashboard. Those are the sorts of ways that I would start to pull it apart to understand what's been done, what techniques were used, and what kinds of things could I use, or that might spark some creativity or some thought of, wow, I could do this in a dashboard. And that's how I might approach pulling apart a dashboard. All right, so we've got a few other questions that have come through, and definitely if you've thought of something, there's still time to pull that up. And I'm going to just take a look real quick and see what we've got that have come through. There is a question here that came through, I think, Bridget, as they were looking at yours. They wanted to know how to enable scroll bars on your dashboard.
Perfect, yes. So if you want, I'll go ahead and take presenter. I'll kind of demo that because I'm pretty sure I know which one it is.
All right.
And so I'm going to guess that this is in relation to kind of this scroll bar. Give me a second right here. And so what I did here, this is actually set to fit to width, I believe. Actually, it's set to standard. And so what that standard does is it just allows me, when for example, if I go to that sheet, you can just see that's a really long dashboard. And then what I did is put it in there with that scroll bar still intact. And so that's, if I were to change it to a different thing, so let's say I hit fit width or I changed it to entire view, you'd see how that would compress, which on a computer this could possibly work, but on a phone it definitely would not work. My benchmark is looking at how fat my fingers are and then making sure that my fat fingers can use it. So that's kind of my standard on that. And then there was also a question around the formatting and the forthcoming transparency. That is tied to the beta. And so one thing to definitely keep an eye on is this Tableau blog. They do a lot of announcements, including things like the navigation that's coming, as well as transparent worksheets. So if you're not involved in the beta, definitely encourage you to be involved in the beta. It's a great way to kind of try out new features, kind of see what's coming, and then kind of get a feel for where they are. And you can also provide feedback, so you get to shape the product itself. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and definitely also, it's been a little while since we've done a webinar covering new features, but if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, I know that it often is one of the most popular webinar topics that we do, so I would not be surprised if we return to that topic here. As Tableau has announced new features, we love to show them off as well. So keep up with us, and we'll try to keep up with Tableau.
Another question is about the Tableau conference. And so both Joshua and I will be presenting, I believe, right?
Yes.
And so my topic is on data ethics. And so I'll be pulling from interpreting. So that's a profession I originally came from, and using ethical models from there and discussing that. So kind of from headlines to headways, looking at just data ethics, what it is, how we can apply it, and some additional things we need to do. And then Joshua, you, I believe, are presenting on prep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And what was the title of that? Because
There it is. It's the fifth one down. How to train your data dragon.
Dragon. There you go. I should have known. And so the other nice part, too, that's very, very helpful is if you're looking and shopping for sessions, please, please, please hit that kind of thumb up, because it also gives Tableau a rough idea of attendance and helps them do room management as well. So if you can help us by kind of doing that thumbs up again on any session that you see that's interesting, even if you're not sure, okay, I'm definitely going to commit to this session, you can click on multiples just to give people an idea of what kind of room.
Very cool. There are a couple of questions about where is Tableau Public, and are any of the things that we've shown today on Tableau Public?
Excellent. So I will answer that question two ways. So Public is available by going to public.tableau.com. It's definitely one of my favorite spaces to go for inspiration. They have things like a gallery, and so you can kind of see all these different visualizations. It's a great way to shop for different methods and different looks. They also will feature new authors. The nice part about Tableau Public is that the use of Tableau Public is free. So if you think, oh, I would love to spend more time on Tableau, but my license won't work at home, you can download Tableau Public. Keep in mind there are some limitations, but then you can also publish online. So you can kind of make your own profile. I find this handy for learning. I use a lot of my public to kind of document my learning, but then also to help facilitate discussions. I know in the past I've done different dashboards to show people what could be. So, for example, schedule management. It's hard to conceptualize, okay, well, on one side, my data source, I've got the worked hours. On this other, I've got this schedule. So how could we show scheduling misses and things like that? So being able to visualize this and understand it. So that's another way I've used Tableau Public. My one caveat, if you start using Tableau Public, is that public means public. So you don't want to put your banking statements up there or things like that. I've seen it, so I do put that warning out there.
Yeah, and it has, they have introduced some new features in the free version, such as preventing downloading of workbooks and preventing downloading of data. Still definitely wouldn't put my bank statement out there, but it does potentially give some flexibility around tightening up what you want to share. If you just want to share just the interactivity versus the data itself, there are those possibilities.
And then the final piece I really like about it is there is a social aspect to it now. And so you can start finding and bookmarking vizzes that you think are fascinating. So one in particular is I'm seeing a lot more scientists use Tableau Public. So for example, Catherine Peterson is a hero of mine. She is working with genomic data to solve macular degeneration. And so she's actually putting some of her work out on Public of kind of figuring out genes and how they play together. And so this is another way that Public can be used is if you've got certain information that you want to share to the public in a limited fashion, you can. And so here is a real live scientist using Tableau Public to communicate her findings.
Yeah. So a couple of other notes. If you are interested in learning about Mike's dashboard, he does actually have a blog. If you simply search for oil and gold and Tableau all together, you should be able to find that fairly easily. And it actually is very fascinating to read what kind of gave him the ideas and how he approached it. So definitely look that up. I do have a blog post or two on mine at bizpainter.com. Bridget shares a lot at tableaufit.com, so definitely check out those resources. In addition to looking up each of our Tableau Public profiles, you'll be able to find some of the vizzes that we've done there. As always, you can download people's workbooks, you can tear them apart, but please don't steal them and claim them for your own. There has been that along the way, and so definitely want to encourage everyone to respect other people's intellectual property and don't claim work that's not yours, and call it out if you see it being done.
And I know Tableau is also looking at ways to attribute. So, I mean, if you do start partaking in Public, it's really nice to display your lineage. There is also the ability to, as you make things on Public, you can actually scrape your own Public profile and analyze that data. So there's a lot that you can do. It's a very vibrant community, and it's a great way to learn.
Definitely is. Well, we appreciate it so much that you've spent another hour with us. It's always a lot of fun to share what we've learned, what we're doing, but we also love learning from you and learning from the community. Definitely give us feedback if there's ever any topic that you'd love to hear, or if we do a topic that you think, well, that didn't resonate with me the way that others do. Let us know that too. We definitely would love to hear all kinds of feedback so that we can better serve you and just better engage with the community. Thank you once again for joining us. The recording will be available at some point within the next few days. Thanks again. Have a great day.